I'm 84, and I've been growing my own medicine in the backyard for going on 30 years. My cardiologist asked me last spring what supplements I take. I told him I don't take any. He looked at me the way people look at something they weren't expecting, like a man reaching into a coat pocket for keys and finding a letter he forgot he wrote. He couldn't argue with the numbers. He wrote lifestyle changes in the chart and moved along. I've written some of this down. It's in my book, the Coleman Remedy book. Links in the description. But what I want to tell you today starts long before I thought to write any of it down. Before the book, before the doctors, before a 15-year-old boy asked me a question on a back porch in August that I still think about every morning. People my age get told two things without variation. Take your pills and slow down. I've done neither, not because I'm reckless, because I found 6 things that work better. Remedies so old and so simple that the people who profit from your illness have spent decades pretending they don't exist. Not because the evidence isn't there, because you can't patent a clove of garlic or a cup of chamomile you grew in your own yard. If any of that sounds familiar, leave it in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more of these conversations, hit subscribe. There's always a chair at this table. The heart attack was in 2009. Good hospital, good doctors. I want to be fair. They did exactly what they were trained to do. 5 medications in the first week. A 6th 4 months later to manage a side effect from one of the original 5. I signed everything they put in front of me and thanked the nurses each time they came in, because Eleanor had been a nurse for 28 years, and I knew very well who was actually paying attention. I went home with a paper bag full of orange bottles and the particular feeling of a man who has just been told the rules of a game he didn't know he was playing. And what I want you to understand about those first months is this. I was grateful. Genuinely. I had spent 68 years figuring everything out on my own. And here was a system. Someone else's system. All I had to do was follow it. There was something almost restful about that. Like setting down a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd stop feeling it. Eleanor bought me a pill organizer, 7 compartments, 1 for each day. She'd fill it on Sunday mornings while I made coffee. Click, 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 the lids going down in a row. That became our ritual, the same as the newspaper she set out before I woke. The same as the mug I always put on her left side. The small architecture of a long life together. It felt like order. It felt like care. What it didn't feel like 6 months in was health. The hands were first. A numbness in the mornings, starting at the fingertips. I am a man who has always understood things through his hands. 31 years of engineering at the TVA. 12 more years of building furniture in the workshop out back. When they started going numb, something in me went quiet in a way I didn't have words for. Then the fog. A gray thickness by noon that made the end of sentences wander off somewhere. That had never happened to me. Not once in 68 years. And then the garden. That was the part I didn't tell Eleanor. I've been in that garden every morning at 5:30 since before we moved to Asheville. Dark still most of the year. I go out with a cup of the tonic my father taught me to make, a recipe he kept in that old handwritten notebook of his, the worn leather cover on the second shelf in the workshop. And I'd stand in the rows before sunrise and listen for the birds. That was the hour that made everything else possible. After the pills, I started going out at 7, then 8, then some mornings not at all. And I told myself it was age, 68. Things slow down. The doctor said so. The pamphlets said so. The television, in that soft voice late at night, ask your doctor if this is right for you. My father Earl would have had something plain to say about that voice. He grew up in Holland County, Kentucky in the 1920s. No pharmacies close, no money for doctors anyway. His grandmother was the healer for the people around them. Earl wrote down everything she knew. 200 pages of handwriting so deliberate it looked like a man who understood this might be the only copy. He gave me that notebook in 1974. When he died in 1989, I put it on the workshop shelf. It had been sitting there for 2 years while Eleanor clicked the pill organizer shut every Sunday. I had not opened it once. I thought being managed and being well were the same thing. It took me a while to understand the difference. Eleanor knew something was wrong. She always knew. 28 years of nursing and 50 years of marriage will do that to a woman. She'd sit across the kitchen table while I pushed oatmeal around the bowl, and she wouldn't say a word. But I'd catch her eyes. There was a question in them she had decided not to ask. And Eleanor only decided not to ask when she had already arrived at the answer. She had seen it before. Patients who came in with one problem and left with 3 prescriptions, and returned 6 months later, diminished in ways that never showed up on any chart. Not sicker, smaller. She said once to a neighbor whose husband had been put on blood thinners and hadn't been himself since, the difference between a cure and a customer is the one thing they'll never teach in medical school. She said it the way she said most things that mattered, like stating the weather. I thought about that sentence more and more in the second year. The fog, the hands. I am an engineer. I spent my career working backward from unexpected output to unexpected input. The unexpected input, the one I had been circling without naming, was the 6 orange bottles on the kitchen counter. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not telling you to throw anything away. I'm not a doctor and I have never claimed to be. What I am saying is that I started reading. The old medical encyclopedias on my shelf, the herbalism textbooks, papers my son Daniel had printed out in Sacramento when I asked him to. And what I found in that reading stopped me cold. Apple cider vinegar, raw, unfiltered, the cloudy kind your grandmother kept in the house without being told to. There are studies linking consistent use to modest improvements in blood pressure and blood sugar. Nothing that replaces a prescription without talking to your doctor. but enough to make a man wonder why it never came up. Not once. In any appointment, with any specialist. Garlic. A crushed clove, not powder. My father ate it every day. His grandmother said it was why the old miners who didn't smoke outlived the ones who did. There's a compound that forms when you crush fresh garlic, allicin, studied for decades for its effects on arterial health. You won't find it at the pharmacy. You can't patent what grows in the ground. Turmeric with black pepper. The pepper is what allows the body to absorb it. That's the part they leave out. Ginger for circulation, which my father called the warming root, and kept dried in a tin on the kitchen shelf. Elderberry for the immune system, grown along my back fence now. And chamomile in the evening, steeped for 12 minutes, which is what Eleanor determined was the right time after years of quiet attention. 6 things, all of them in my father's notebook, all in Eleanor's nursing journal, where she had spent years cross-referencing folk knowledge with the physiology she understood, all absent from any conversation I'd had with any of the 6 specialists who had seen me since the heart attack. I've written the whole of it down, all 6, the amounts I use, how to prepare each one, what Eleanor's nursing notes said about why they work. It's in the Coleman Remedy book. Link is in the description below. I wrote it carefully, the way my father wrote his notebook, because I wanted to get it right while I still had the chance. It is not a prescription, it is a record. The kind a man leaves when he wants to be useful to the people who come after. It was Marcus who said it, my grandson, Patricia's boy, 15 at the time. He and his mother had driven up from Austin in August 2011. The kind of August in Asheville where the heat settles into the evening and the lightning bugs come up early over the garden. We were sitting on the back porch after supper. Eleanor had gone inside. Her heart was already giving her trouble by then, though neither of us had named it yet, in the way you name a thing when you're ready for what naming it means. Marcus had been quiet most of the evening. He has always had that in him, the ability to be still without making the room uncomfortable. He was watching the garden, the chamomile along the south border, the elderberry up over the fence. And then, without any introduction, he turned to me and said, "Grandpa, why don't you use the stuff in Grandpa Earl's book?" I said, "What made you think of that?" He said, "Because you've been tired all summer, and I've never seen you tired before." A 15-year-old boy, in one sentence. He had seen what 2 years of specialist appointments and quarterly blood work had not once touched on. Not the numbers on the chart, not the ejection fraction, the tired, the particular tired of a man who is being maintained rather than living. I didn't answer right away. We sat there with the lightning bugs a while longer, and something that had been building for a long time shifted quietly into a new position. The way a heavy thing settles when it finally finds its balance. The next morning I was in the garden at 5:30. For the first time in close to 2 years, I stood in the rows in the dark, and I could smell the chamomile and the elderberry and the damp earth. And it was like opening a window in a room that had been shut so long you'd stop remembering it had one. I just stood there. Sometimes that is the whole thing. Then I went inside and took my father's notebook off the workshop shelf. The cover was cooler than the air around it. It is always cooler. I have noticed that for 30 years and stopped trying to explain it. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened to page 1. Earl Coleman's handwriting, small and deliberate, like a man who understood paper was something you didn't waste. Page 1 said, "What grows near you can heal you. What they sell you might not." 10 words. The whole inheritance. The knowledge of a woman who healed the people around her with what grew in the hills she knew, distilled by her grandson into 10 words, because sometimes 10 words is all a man has time to pass along. I called Eleanor in from the bedroom. She sat across from me with her chamomile, and I read her the passages about the heart. She listened the way nurses listen, stopping me occasionally to say, "That one has a mechanism. I know what that does." Then explaining it in the language of systems, because she knew that was how I understood things. We spent 3 days at that table, his notebook and hers, the Appalachian knowledge and the nursing knowledge side by side. On the 3rd evening, Eleanor set down her pen and said, "Arthur, the remedies don't cure things. They remind the body what it already knows how to do." I have thought about that sentence every morning since October 2019. It took close to a year to wean off the medications. Carefully, with my doctor's awareness, if not his enthusiasm. By autumn 2012, the pill organizer was empty. My blood pressure was where it had been at 50. My cardiologist reviewed the results twice before saying anything, and what he said was, "I'm not sure what to attribute this to." I told him I'd been using things my father taught me. He wrote lifestyle changes in the chart, and we moved on. I wasn't there for the attribution. I was there because I was 71 years old, and I wanted 30 more years of 5:30 in the garden. I got 8 more years with Eleanor, 8 more years of Sunday mornings and chamomile tea, and the quiet that settles between two people who have learned how to be still together. I would take those 8 years again, the same way, right through to the end. The end wasn't something we had a say in. The years before it were ours. Now I'm 84. I still wake at 5:30, still make the tonic my father made. Same recipe, same page, the binding held together with a piece of tape I put on it in 1991. The chamomile is coming up along the south fence. The elderberry will need another year. The turmeric's in a container this season because Asheville winters are still too cold for it in the ground. I've written it all down for you, everything my father knew, everything Eleanor taught me, from 2 notebooks and a lifetime of watching the difference between being managed and being well. Everything I worked out in 3 days at this kitchen table. I called it the Coleman Remedy Book. The link is in the description. It is not a medical textbook. I am not a doctor, and I never pretended to be one. I'm a man who was handed a notebook by a man who was handed the knowledge of a woman who paid attention her whole life to what the land could do. That is my credential. Read it the way you'd read a letter from someone who stopped performing a long time ago and now just tells the truth, not looking for a prescription, looking for company. My father died in 1989, 71 years old, black lung. He never had the chance to wean off medications because he never had money for medications. He had the land and the notebook and the knowledge passed down to him the way you pass something when it's the most valuable thing you own. I used to think that was poverty. I understand it differently now. It was trust. Trust in what the body already knows when something reminds it. Trust in what grows near you. Trust that the simplest thing, done with attention and patience and consistency, will generally outlast the most complicated thing someone with something to sell does to you from across a desk. My father wrote 10 words on the first page of a notebook he never thought would leave the family. I'm 84. I'm still reading them every morning. I'm not sure there's more to say than that.